Okay, if we now move on to the second part, and there is a grand shift that is going on, and this is something that I was introduced to 30 years ago by when I was young, and my client was young, and his colleague and my boss, two Americans, sat and didn't say a word, because here were these two Europeans going on about the shift in empires, in a theory as put out, I think it was by Rees-Mogg's father, which highlighted how empires shifted, and new empires rose under the shadow and protection of the old empire, and the old empire basically bankrupted itself by particularly its defense initiative or requirements. Recently, the British apparently came up under the Dutch. I'm not really a historian in that area, but we can certainly see that the American Empire came up under the British, and the Chinese Empire, even though they don't seem to be under the Americans, they have benefited massively from selling to the Americans. So I don't recall the chap's name offhand. I think it's Ray Dalio, one of the world's wealthiest investors. He's done a lot of work on this, and whether he was aware of the original work or whether it's entirely his own parallel construct, I have no idea. But he's done a lot of work, and he highlights in detail a lot of the shifts and the imperatives that drive each element. Essentially, the young upstart empire benefits from the stability and protection of the older empire. It has cheaper labor, it is economically stronger in the sense that it has lower wages, harder working people, and it begins to ascend. Now, the old empire still has the benefit of setting the standard currency, because then all loans are made in that currency, and of course the nation benefits from the interest on those loans. I probably got that wrong, actually, that's backwards, but don't worry about it. And so 30 years since I looked at finance. There are other people that touch on it, or you can read Ray Dalio's book. But the point is that the older empire gets distracted by its military imperative to keep the peace, keep the order, keep the economic benefits that it acquired while it was a young empire. And there's another factor which is interesting, which is that we saw this in the British Empire, that you will read about manifest destiny, divine right, that we were simply born to rule the world because obviously we were the better people, we were more civilized, and we were bringing the advantages of the British way of life to the heathens and the natives and what have you. Ironically, a lot of the people that then got free of us, of course, did implement Western-style governments, including the US and its variation, and we'll get on to Rome and what have you. But we're all all governments since the time of Rome have effectively been on the Roman model, ruled by an elite, taxation set by the elite, tribute by the elite, a powerful military to maintain order until it eventually becomes fat and indolent, and a more aggressive young upstart comes in and takes over. Now, we're seeing the same kind of phenomenon in the US with American exceptionalism. Having risen economically, having been effectively safe on the American mainland, they really had no particular threat. It was a matter of choice to enter World War I, to enter World War II, and yes, we're fortunate they did, and we've enjoyed a great deal of prosperity, generally on the back of that. Otherwise, it would have been left to the Soviets, and most of Europe would be Soviet. So, but the illusion is that it is something special about Americans, just like it was something special about British. No, it was basically the We had a good military that could go in and secure the economic resources. We enjoyed the economic resources. We basically got very, very wealthy, and then we needed a military to protect the environment that we had set up, and that then became expensive. And as we wanted a higher standard of living, so we were less willing to work and more expensive at working, whereas the new upstart would come in. And for us, the new upstart was America, and for America, the new upstart is China. But notice how the American exceptionalism and the manifest destiny of a certain Middle Eastern nation play into this sort of naivety. There is no humility. There is no live and let live. This was a key thing that I recognized when reading the RAND 2019 strategy report about arming Ukraine and economic sanctions to weaken or extend Russia. They went on and on about competition, and I realized that this is at the heart of the arrogance and failure of the West. There is no live and let live. You are always in competition, which means if you're always in competition, anything you can use to win, you'll use. So Ukraine was a very handy tool, you know. But ultimately, you've got these two illusions or delusions, three delusions perhaps. You've got the ideological hubris that actually is divine right, manifest destiny, American exceptionalism, and that drives you to passionately to push for your world. Secondly, you are the most powerful nation militarily, and so it's very tempting to use that, put that to good use to maintain the order. And then I've forgotten the third one offhand, whatever, but you get the idea. Basically, rather than actually recognizing, a sensible person would recognize, we did very well out of that. There comes a time, very much like in your own life. You're young, you learn, you know nothing, you earn nothing. In your 20s and 30s, you start to get a decent salary, and you probably take on a lot of debt, but you look forward to the day you can pay it off. 20 or 30 years later, you may have paid it off, and you may now have a home and an income and a pension, and you would naturally start thinking in terms of protecting it. Had Britain, had the US, Britain, we had a bit of a problem because Hitler essentially accelerated the issue for us, and that's a topic. This issue, the fact that we actually accelerate things sometimes where things that are not in our control, sometimes they are in our control. And our greed and arrogance is very much under our control, and that also accelerates the demise. What America could have done at the end of the Cold War was say, wow, look at that, we won, wonderful. Let's now relax, we can ease off on the military, we can focus on the economy, we can evolve into a more mature society, and basically push towards something that would be sensible, economic and fair, and it would prolong the success while riding to the top. Instead, what we've seen in the UK and in the US is a determination to introduce concept, ideas, even entire peoples who create conflict just because they think differently. And if whether it's immigration with people that we import who think differently, or whether it's agendas that arise like LGBT to tell us to think differently, ultimately it all serves as I said in the first part, the agenda of chaos control. Create uncertainty, create doubt, create instability, because at the end of the day, that is the overriding goal of the people at the very top of the pyramid. But what this means in terms of the shift of empires is that exactly when America, and according to Ray Dalio, if I forgot that right, America has already passed the hump. So, basically World War II to 2022, that's barely one lifetime of dominance in the world. Not exactly a very long-lasting tribute. And now, through their actions, they are actually accelerating the demise of the America and the West, because we have survived in somewhat reasonable order in the shadow of America. And given the actions of the EU, given the actions of America and the UK, we are accelerating that demise into a realm of chaos. And this is one of the things that Ray, if I've got his name right, highlights, that we as it gets harder to pay the bills, we see civil unrest, and we see eventually to the point of potentially entire disorder and war, which is why we want to be aware of these kind of shifts. We would inevitably be aware of them, given the magnitude of the agendas, and even the economists are declaring, world economic shortages, economic failure of sterling. Ironically, the country that we're supposed to be weakening is doing fine, is flush with cash because it's a strong natural resource-based country. We, however, are entirely resource-based. We basically live on hopes and dreams, and we assume that life will continue. Well, life may continue, but there's no obligation that it continue at the level that we enjoyed, and especially when the people in charge want to implement policies that do harm to our economies and our ability to live our lives. So where we are is that effectively there is just about anybody with influence and power is pushing their agenda. It's like giving a class or an entire school, opening the doors, putting a wad of cash in their hand and say, go and create some chaos. So you've got neocons doing their thing, you've got the EU doing its thing, you've got LGBT and other agendas doing their thing, you've got Republicans and Democrats doing their thing, you've got Bill Gates doing his thing, you've got Soros doing his thing. So every player, Johnson coming up with a not EU, not NATO alliance in the East, a total absurdity, but it adds to the chaos, and that's his job. So everybody with power and influence is basically adding to the chaos. And of course, as I say, at the very top, you've got the people where that is the only thing they care about, chaos and control. That's fine. So we have a world that is rushing to the destruction of a world that we've taken for granted, and what is going to arise out of that, certainly in the West, is likely to be a relatively impoverished and fragmented society. So how do we deal with that? And I'll make that part 3.